Welcome to the first Neo Spotlight of the year 2022. And I would not want to kick us off without wishing you and everyone who is going to listen today or in the future to this webcast a very happy 2022. Our first Neo Spotlight is going to focus on a very exciting company that listed with us a little bit more than a year ago, and that company is Cybin. And I'm very pleased and very honored to have with us today the CEO of Cybin, Doug Drysdale. Doug, welcome.
Hey Josh, good to see you again, and Happy New Year. Happy 2022.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you, and I hope a year that is going to bring you all the success that you and your organization deserve. Doug, let's immediately step into a key question that I'm sure a lot of investors are asking themselves. Where are we today with the psychedelics industry? What is your view on how it has, as a whole, and I'm not talking about Cybin specifically, but as a whole, how it has been developing over the past year? What do you see as the big successes? What do you see as elements that maybe concern you? So a bit of a state of the union around the psychedelics industry.
Yeah, you know, Josh, it's a sector that I think has matured or begun to mature really quite quickly. I think we're at a point now where we're something like 50 or so psychedelics companies that are public across Canada and US, which, when you think about it, that's an awful lot of companies forming in the last year or two, and quite unusual, I think, to see things developing that quickly. So many companies going public. But already, I think we've seen this sort of mad rush to innovate, a mad rush of companies to try to get into the space. But already we're starting to see a maturing, I think, of the sector. And over the next 12 months, I think we'll see more of that. 50 companies can't all get access to the capital they need. 50 companies can't all differentiate. The IP landscape is emerging. It's a bit like an iceberg field at the moment. You can just see the tips of things, but an awful lot of what's below the surface will become public in the next 12 months, and that will, I think, shape the sector. So I think we're going to see a fair amount of consolidation. It's already beginning. I'm seeing some signs of that already. And this is going to be a year of data, I think. I mean, last year was a year of news and companies and lots of excitement. But I think reality has settled in a bit. We've seen some data come from a couple of industry leaders, and we're going to see more data coming in this next 12 months that will continue to differentiate a few players from the rest of the sector, I think.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and it's a bit of classical. Like there's a new industry that emerges. It is, in fact, I often say that it is in fact big pharma, because this is not like an industry where you can start with a couple of million. This is big investments. This is going through very rigorous processes, and then it's a multi-year process. But you have a large number of companies that emerge. If you look at those 50, whatever the exact figure is, 50, 60 companies that are there, how many, if you look in your crystal ball, and I will not hold you to that, how many you think are still going to be there at the end of this year? And you talk about M&A. I also think maybe some of them will just disappear, or don't you think so?
Yeah, some will just disappear. Some will have some IP that others will want to merge with, and bring into the fold. When I think about just the pure drug development companies within the sector, because there are a few companies that are not doing drug development, but maybe building clinics or services around them. But I think about just the drug development companies, which are the ones that are most capital intensive. I'd be surprised if there were more than 10. 12 months from now, and it'll likely go down further from that beyond 12 months, I think.
Yeah, and there will be only so much access to capital, because that is the key point, and capital will select the companies that are the leaders, as you said. Now, that is a bit the evolution of the entire sector. How was 21 for Cybin? How do you look back on your year? Are you happy? Are you disappointed about things? What is your feeling about 21?
We had an amazing year, actually. From going public, like you said, a little bit over a year ago now, on the New York Exchange, and then closing the acquisition of Adelia Therapeutics in Boston also about a year ago. We've gone from that around 5 employees, maybe 14 months ago, to 55 today. We're operating in Canada, in the US, in the UK, and in Ireland. We've built more than 50 partnerships around the world with CROs and scientific groups to manage our preclinical and clinical work. So we've got a really strong ecosystem, and drug development is very complicated. It's really not something that you can't really build a whole pharmaceutical company that's fully integrated in 1 year. So you need those partners. We filed more than 15 patents. In the last year, we've had our first patent allowed by the US Patent and Trademark Office for CYB4, which is a novel deuterated version of DMT for anxiety disorders. And that's what this is all about, creating differentiated molecules that can have patent protection to justify the ongoing development. So we've had a tremendous year, some really positive preclinical results with our depression program, CYB3, that clearly differentiates our analog of psilocybin from classical psilocybin, which has a whole range of limitations. So it's been a fantastic year. The next 6 months, though, is going to be very busy too. We've got a lot of upcoming clinical work that we'll be doing over the next few months.
Yeah, let's come back to that in a few seconds. Maybe zooming in on what you just said, and also tying it back to the first question. I think I'm not I'm not trying here to say something that's going to make you happy. I really believe this. You are definitely one of the leaders in this space, and you and I can probably very rapidly mention 5 other names that we would put in that category. If you compare yourselves to those other firms, what is different in how you approach things, and how do you see them developing versus you? Like how do you fit in that picture of the big players?
Yeah, like I think it comes down to a few things at the end of the day that will differentiate companies from the herd, if you like. The first being the team. Our team is phenomenally experienced. We've managed more than 60 development programs with the FDA over the course of our careers. So we know how to develop drugs. And I think that's very important. I think a lot of companies that got started in the space were very interested and attracted to the sector, but didn't necessarily have deep drug development experience. And it's a long game, as you say. It's a multi-year effort. You've got to have the team in place to do that. We've also been very focused on IP, on differentiation. I think there are more than 20 companies working on psilocybin, which makes no sense to me from either an IP point of view or the ability to get any form of data exclusivity from regulators like FDA or Health Canada or in Europe. And without those protections, without the differentiation, you can't continue to invest. And so we've really been focused on IP. And as I said, we've got the first composition of matter patent allowed. And then I think the third thing is balance sheet. We've raised more than $120 million since inception, and we feel strongly capable of continuing to raise capital. We had more than $75 million on the balance sheet in the last quarter. So it's really those 3 things. And you're right, there are a handful of companies that I think fall into that category.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting to see where the approach is, and I think a very important message for investors to understand, because I'm talking about the investors that are looking at your stock, and not talking about the ones that you will reach out to potentially raise more capital, because they understand it. They understand that differentiation and that focus on investing in what you can protect from an IP perspective, because that's where the value is. If you don't have that, you're not really creating value. You're maybe working for the good of humanity, but you are not creating value for your shareholders. And that's a very important element. I want to stress it for the people who are listening to us today. You mentioned about lots of exciting things coming ahead of you, and I'm aware of a couple of them that I think are extremely exciting. But I'd love you to take us a bit through that. So, what is your roadmap for the next 6 months? And you know what? Let's go a little bit further. Let's talk about 22 as a whole.
Yeah, so 22 is really building off of what we achieved in 2021. And one of the major achievements in 2021 was in our depression program, where we performed a whole range of preclinical studies on our novel molecule. So it's a deuterated analog of psilocybin. And so what we've been trying to do with our programs is to take the classical psychedelic molecules, retain the efficacy and the power of them, but overcome some of the limitations. So with psilocybin specifically, it's very long acting, 6-8 hours in the clinic, which is an extremely long time, a long time for patients. It's tough to think about how we get that reimbursed, and it's tough for the clinics, the depression clinics or the addiction clinics, to see how it works with their business models. So that's one challenge, the duration, and another major challenge is variability. We see significant interpatient variability with psilocybin.
Okay,
and that's a real challenge. If you can't predict the response, that's challenging. So we've seen some great results with CYB3, our depression program, where we've shown we can cut the clinic times in half potentially for patients. We massively reduce the interpatient variability, so more predictable. And it has better brain penetration in these preclinical models. So we expect to be able to give a lower dose to get the same effect, which potentially can mean less side effects. So that's been the foundation of what we've been working on in 2021. The next stage in 2022 is moving those studies into humans. And so we'll be wrapping up that preclinical work this quarter. We expect to make filings with the FDA in the US and with the MHRA in the UK in the second quarter of this year. And we expect both our depression program, CYB3, and our anxiety program, CYB4, to move into human studies around mid-year this year, with some initial results for CYB3 coming by the end of the year. We'll see some safety and some PK data by the end of 2022. So those are some really major milestones in drug development. There's an awful lot of logistical work that goes into making those things happen. And so it's an exciting few months ahead for us.
Yeah, no, that is super exciting. And when you look at that, help me and the audience understand. Once you reach, the human trial stage, where does that take us in the full life cycle of bringing, a first drug to market?
Well, first of all, the exciting thing about these molecules is that we've already seen really strong indications of efficacy in a whole range of academic studies, and with psilocybin in a phase 2 study last year. So we know that there's potential for these molecules to work. It's not like with many other early stage drug development programs where you're waiting to see if those animal models translate into humans. Here we already know, and it's about optimizing the molecules. So we're looking to do that over the course of this next year. And then the next step with CYB3 would be to move into much larger scale human studies in 2023. And that's the final stage before we would apply for regulatory approval to Health Canada or FDA, et cetera.
Yep. And what is and I don't want to pin you to anything over here, but just to get a feeling, like give a range to make it easy. What would be the time range to take a product like that to market?
Yeah, it's typically 3 to 5 years from inception. And I'll say that where we are now with CYB3, it's taken us about 15 months to go from the bench into human studies. And typically that's, I'd say for a well-established big pharma company, that would normally be about a 3-year period.
Yeah.
And on average, across the whole of biotech, it's more like a 6-year period. So to go from bench to say bedside in 15 months is fantastic. And it's because we know so much about these molecules to start with that we're able to do that.
Yeah. And then you said you build a lot of partnerships around yourself. Could you tell us a little bit more about those partnerships and how do they fit in your overall picture today, but I can also imagine that some of them will play a very important role tomorrow.
Yeah, you can imagine that moving into human studies is quite complicated. And these are all scheduled substances, so it's tough to move them around from geography to geography. And each location that touches these molecules, whether it's synthesis or preclinical studies or human studies, they all need to be licensed. So it's quite a complex process to get that up and running. And we've been focused in the last year in making sure that we can operate in both Europe and North America in parallel. Clinical studies need to be somewhat global. They need to be in multiple jurisdictions. And so we built a supply chain from synthesis to preclinical work to human study work in both Europe and the US. We have parallel supply chains so we can run clinical studies in multiple locations at the same time and keep regulators happy on both sides of the Atlantic. And that's, as you can imagine, an awful lot of work going through all of those steps and doing it in duplicate as well.
I'm sure that a lot of people don't get it. Like, this is a big logistical effort also that you face as an organization. It's not just you sitting in your laboratory working on these products and then testing them out. Like, it's setting up an entire ecosystem around the organization to enable it, and that is to enable the research, enable the trials, enable the go-to-market.
Yes, exactly. It starts with, of course, just making the product, making the molecule. It has to be synthesized. It has to be tested. It has to be scaled. That has to move into preclinical studies, and those preclinical studies involve multiple species and multiple testings. The tests themselves have to be developed because the molecules are new. And then all of that work has to go into quite an enormous regulatory package that goes to regulators to enable us to move into human studies. So it is in a very large ecosystem. And as I say, it has to be multinational in order to be able to move through these regulatory hurdles in more than one jurisdiction.
And today your focus is on North America and Europe. Do you have the intention to expand that in the foreseeable future, or is that later stages? Your focus today on those two regions, or do you want to go further?
Yeah, obviously, depression, addiction, mental health disorders are global. They're not restricted to North America or to Europe. So our hope, of course, will be to find partners around the world that can help us bring these treatments to people all around the world. 700 million people globally suffering from depression or anxiety or eating disorders and addictions. So it's a large task, and we likely can't do it all by ourselves. And so we'll be looking for partners outside of those major jurisdictions.
Yeah. Question that I'm sure a lot of investors have. That is, when you look, and I'm looking to the left there because I'm looking at the chart. You look at the journey of the stock of the company and the stock price. You see an interesting evolution. That it is a growth company. It's impacted by a lot of factors, not only what you are doing, but also the fact that it is a growth company, and just things as simple as interest rates have an impact on your company, because that is just the way that future revenue is being integrated in the price of a stock. So some volatility in there. We peaked, I think, around what was it? Maybe August last year. The stock now came down. What are your thoughts about the evolution of the stock price? And I don't think it's unique to Cybin, by the way. But what are your thoughts about the evolution of the stock price? And ask you that before I get into the next question is, how should investors look at it? But let's maybe first talk about how do you see that evolving? And one message that you gave, and which I think is very important, is you're sitting on some good cash. But I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, because it's a fair question. And as I started out at the beginning of the conversation, I think it's very much sector driven still. We're at a stage where I think where companies are trying and beginning to start differentiating, but I think investors have been treating the sector kind of as a whole in the last year. And we've seen some now maturing, I think. and some reality setting in. I think there was a big rush in the beginning, and now it's really about operating and executing, and I think that's where we are. I think we're fortunate that we've taken a kind of slow and steady approach. The stock is one of few that are above the go public price. We're about two times where we went public, and many of our peers who went public at much higher valuations are now well down below the go public prices. So I think we have a long way to go. Our analyst coverage is very strong. I think we have 8 analysts covering us now, with a consensus that's well above $8, and we're trading down at around $1.50. So clearly they think there's a lot of upside, and it's really now about, as I said, moving away from the news cycle, the sort of rush cycle, into a cycle of data and execution. And as we've talked about, I think we spent the last year making sure we have that team and cash and infrastructure in place to execute over the next several months.
Yeah, and that is a critical point. The second one that, again, I would like to underline, Doug, because again, investors really need to think about it. I agree with you. They invested in this sector as a sector, and you need to move into looking at companies now. Like, you got the fundamentals of a sector, that's one factor, but you got the fundamentals of a company, and that becomes very critical. If you look at some of the other well-established industries, think about whatever, the financial industry, the banking industry, what you will see is, yes, it will all follow an industry trend, but you will see some fundamental differentiation between the companies because they perform in a different way, and that is going to become very important with all those growth sectors. It's a case in your sector. I'll give you another one which has nothing to do with the space you're in, obviously, but think about the entire crypto space. You see the same, where I'm trying to make people understand that Bitcoin has nothing to do with for example, the entire decentralized finance space as it is developing, but people still pull it all together, and I think there's a big effort of education that has to come from advisors, that has to come from reading, that also has to come from companies. So yes, it's important about focusing on execution. That is always critical in everything that you do. How about helping people understand things better? What do you think can we do over there? How can we educate them and make them understand that maturity is starting to come into the sector, and you need to think about things in a better way? Are you going to change anything in the way that you communicate, that you reach out to investors? What are your thoughts around that?
I think it's a continued effort. You're right. And as you know, with communications, often you have to say things 5 or 10 or 50 times before the message really gets across. So we've been true to our mission from the beginning, and that is to engineer psychedelics into actual therapeutics that have real patient benefits and are really differentiated with IP around them. And we'll continue to relay that message and continue to execute. I think as I said, we really are moving into a year of being data driven, and companies can only go so long on news. They have to execute at the end of the day, and I think that execution is what's going to separate companies over the next 12 months.
Yeah. So you said it at the very beginning, data driven, and it's coming with data, and it's making people understand that data is important, and not just the announcement effect of something that is maybe more general to the industry. It's a specific data of every company on its own. So the key question, of course, that all of that takes us to is, I'm an investor. What should I do? should I sit back? Should I just to be very clear here to everyone, neither you or I are going to give any advice here. We're just going to look a bit at facts. Like what should be my attitude towards this security today, and what are the factors that I should take into consideration? I think you already covered one, of course, which is key, which is the analyst reports. But other thoughts?
Yeah, I think, as you said, Josh, this is, although we're talking about psychedelic molecules here, this is just like any other biotech sector. It's driven by milestones. And those and value goes up stepwise as those milestones are achieved. And those milestones include completing preclinical work. They include filing IND applications with the FDA or MHRA or Health Canada. They include starting human studies. They include interim data, final data from those studies. Each of these is a small step in progress. Each of them increases the chance of a final approval. It's sort of edging your way there. And typically, we see biotech stocks go up in a stepwise fashion as each of those milestones are achieved. So I would say that where we are today is a good place to get into the stock. We think we have a lot of milestones ahead of us in the next 12 months, and clearly, as you say, the analysts agree with that. So I would say that now's a good time to be looking hard at Cybin, but also, of course, and as you do your diligence on any company in the space, the team, and the balance sheet, and the intellectual property as we move forward.
Yeah, it's about this reminds me of the song of a simple mind. It's about seeing the signal in the noise. I think there has been a lot of noise, and now you have to zoom in on the facts, on the data. We talked about that a lot, and look back also. That is one of the ways that I would do it. How have you been executing upon what you said? I think that is typically a very important element about what you can expect about what you announce in the future. And then an evolution, you're going to see an evolution. It's probably an industry, and that is in my eyes a sign of maturity, and in fact a good sign, where we may be going to see less of those big spikes. We're going to see less volatility, but we're going to see trends. And the well-performing, the well-executing companies are going to go in one direction. The other ones will go into another direction, and the other ones with some good IP, as you said, will be acquired at probably a fraction of their original valuation by the well-performing ones. So interesting opportunity for investors. As I always say, do your homework. And look at the past, look at the plans, look at the execution, and think about what is being built over here. This is, again, I call it big pharma. This is companies that are building tremendous potential, but it's a multi-year process. And I think the ones that are executing will be the winners. And don't underestimate, of course, the importance of IP. Doug, any other thoughts you would like to share before we close this very interesting, I would call it, update session on Cybin? Because believe it or not, the 30 minutes already passed by.
Look, thanks for having me, Josh. Look, I will say that you're right, that the sector is maturing, and we are starting to see a few companies like Cybin differentiate and move ahead of the pack. But that said, this is a very large unmet need in mental health, and as we see various companies, Cybin included, execute, it's good for the whole sector, because one thing about drug development is there's always an element of risk. But as we see data from various companies, Cybin included, I think that de-risks the entire sector as we move forward, and that's good for investors to see signals coming from various parts of the sector, not just from Cybin.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And nothing like a bit of good competition amongst good performers, and it does indeed establish credibility.
Yeah.
Doug, I would like to thank you very much for your time today. I would like to thank you to be our guest in our first spotlight of the year, and I'm looking forward to our next catch up. And maybe we should not wait that long, because I'll be honest with you, I am very keen to hear more about when the results are going to come out from your human trials. I think that is a very critical milestone that is coming up for your organization, and things seem to be boding for a quite positive outcome over there. Wishing you the very best. Thank you once again. Thanking our audience for joining us, and to all those that will watch this on the social media. I hope for you too that it will be very interesting, and I would suggest to all of you, if you have questions, feel free to send them to us. Feel free to send them to Cybin. We'll make sure that they all come in front of Doug's eyes, and that he can get back to you with the facts and the data. Thank you, Doug. Take care.
Thank you, Joss. All the best for 22.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.